company tried to push me out, so I took a 2-year vacation and halted their production. A family friend was working at the same company since he was 26, up to when he was 64, when he encountered a problem. Part of the problem was that the law increased the retirement age from 62 to 65, when he was in his early mid-50s, and then again from 65 to 67 when he was about 63. From everything I've heard, I think they were giving an extra vacation week after every 6 years at the company. So on top of the standard 4 weeks, he had an extra 6 weeks at the time of these events. Also, people had access to 2 weeks of either working in a home office when the job allowed them to, or an extra week off for those that couldn't work from home. So he was getting 11 weeks off each year. As a bonus, the family owners were allocating people above 55 to use their vacation time as they desired, all at once with about 2 weeks notice as a courtesy or segmented. They could even simply not use it and pile it up for when retirement time came. Another issue we have in our country is that when you submit retirement paperwork to the government, they take freaking ages. So it's often the case that they may take over 2 years to calculate what to pay you and actually start paying. They pay back that lost time, but it's still an issue. For the period they delay and calculate, you're getting only the minimum amount. But the guy already had about 44 years of experience and a bit more ahead of him as an engineer, and a well-paid one at that, which meant a great retirement amount. So the owners allowed people to gather up their weeks of time off at the very end and take 20 to 30 weeks off while submitting their retirement paperwork. That made sure the money being paid would last them longer into the calculation period. Some didn't use it, but many did. Anyway, the company gets sold because the owners saw some writing on the wall that their profits wouldn't last more than 6 or 7 more years, and they wanted out. They were getting into their old age as well. New ownership, some Coca-Cola subsidiary, takes over and starts removing previous rules. Our family friend had 2 other colleagues working his same position. The new owners push out one guy and fire him. Then the third one has a heart attack literally a week later and doesn't survive. They then go and dock my friend's pay by 15% because he's making too much for a simple engineer. What the owners didn't know was that those 3 engineers held a patent for a specific piece of machinery, a second one on how to make that machinery, and a third one on the production of a small yet significant component. The old owner had allowed them to become the patent holders when they invented a new method of production years ago that made production 30% cheaper and 75% faster. Well, now my friend is suddenly alone in his department at 64 years old, and the company hires 6 people for him to train on his same position. At the same time, they give him until the end of the year to gather up all of the piled up vacation time he still had yet to claim. Notice that wording, claim, not use. Well, it turns out the guy had only been using between 1 and 5 of his 11 weeks for the past decade. So he had gathered up 87 weeks of time off that still hadn't been claimed. The owners apparently hadn't looked at specific cases, so they get him the 6 new people to train, and they tell him that he needs to have them trained in 6 months. He still has about 2.5 years until retirement, so he just goes and takes 87 weeks of vacation time with only 3 hours notice on a Friday evening, to be started the upcoming Monday. Not only did they never require advance notice, but they didn't even pay attention to his time off request until the next Thursday, when the CEO noticed 6 people sitting around all day with nobody training them. The phone calls start, then emails, then letters get added to the mix, then home visits by low-ranking secretaries and such to deliver the letters. Then management starts visiting his home. By week 7, the CEO has visited 3 times, but the door hasn't been opened once. His mother-in-law lives literally across the street, and he and his wife are taking care of her. So most of the time they're over there and can see everybody visiting their house. The production is actually running on its own, but no upkeep is done on the critical components. On week 11, one of 2 production lines breaks down. They start visiting his house 3 or 4 times a day. 2 weeks later, the second line breaks down. He of course has a lot of friends inside, so he's getting constant updates. He knows that at this point, the company only has about 4 weeks of backstock to keep the rest of production running. It's December, right before Christmas, and he goes in during week 13. He says he needs to take some things from his locker, and the CEO starts yelling at him. You're stopping your time off right now. You're coming back to work to fix everything up. So he offers to come back for 3 days under an agreement that the entire week will be returned to him to use for time off. The CEO reluctantly agrees and tries to push him to also come back for training. He won't budge. He's only coming back to fix things up and go on vacation again. By Saturday, everything is fixed up, and he even leaves a couple of basic instructions on what needs greasing every week. Then he's off again. A few weeks pass, New Year's has come around, and a line is broken again. He gets called back, and the CEO pretends to offer him the same same deal as last time. Come in, fix things up, go back on holiday. He goes in for 2 days, fixes everything, and explains a couple more things to the team of 6, who by now have been given other duties, so they won't be sitting around all day. When he's about to leave, the CEO says, "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. The guy's confused, but the CEO explains, "You could only claim your time off until the end of last year. You just ended your claim time off, so you're losing the remaining 69 weeks. The guy is furious, and he just goes straight to report the company to workers' rights. They're actually dumbfounded by the time off he has amassed, and the lady serving him calls her colleagues to listen in. They laugh their rears off by the end of his story, and they actually issue a verdict the very next day. It usually takes weeks, but apparently they had too much fun with this one. He is to get all of his time off under the previous rule for the time accrued before the rules changed, so he has his 69 weeks, and he also has the 6 weeks from the new year. So he goes in with a verdict and gives it personally to a fuming CEO. My friend said steam was practically coming out of the boss's ears. The CEO begrudgingly accepts the deal. The engineer agrees to come in 3 days for every 5 weeks off. If he's needed during his time off, tough luck. They should work to produce backstock. A full year goes by like this. The guy is 66 at this point. He's been training his 6 replacements slowly every 5 weeks, and he's on his last visit before he takes the last 5 weeks off. The CEO goes to him and delivers personally the firing notice for the first day he will be back. He pretends to be shocked and leaves for another 5 weeks. This one is a problem, because if you apply for retirement even half a year early, you lose significantly more than just that small period. And he has about 10 months before he's supposed to retire. Well, his last 5 weeks expire, and he goes in to gather his stuff, which was basically just a coffee cup since he knew this was coming and had taken everything else over time. He gets an extremely big payout for the firing, with no cause offered for his termination. The next day, he sends a cease and desist letter to the company for the use of the 3 patents. Remember that engineer they fired? Well, my friend had talked to him, and they agreed on this revenge plan. They also talked with the widow of their other colleague, and she too was on board. He'd apparently been supporting the widow the whole time, but didn't mention it to anyone. So now the company has to stop using those machines, as well as the associated production method, with zero notice. All the competitors have found, built, and patented their own versions. If this company doesn't find a solution, it's going to cost 40% more, and take about double the time to produce the same parts and procedures used in production. So they would need to double the lines if they want to use the old method while they look for a new one. After just 3 weeks of looking to license one of the competitors' production methods and not getting anywhere, with stock being extremely low by that point, they struck a deal with the guy. He will be an external contractor, who obviously keeps the patents to his name. He'll be doing the maintenance on his own, will be paid by the hour what he previously made on a full day, and he will be on call for maintenance while having one person there at all times for upkeep. He went and stole all 6 of the people he trained and hired them in his new external contracting company just to put them back to work in the same factory, but with almost double the pay they'd been receiving. He fully trained them very quickly and was now getting paid bank. The CEO was fired for almost stopping production, as the deal was only struck mere hours before backstock ran out. Not to mention he cost the company a ton of money by firing the wrong guy. At the old owner's funeral, many of the old employees met up and told stories. Apparently there were 3 more similar cases with patent holders because the old owner treated his team extremely well. But this guy was the only one to string them on for almost 2 years by staying out on vacation time while getting paid. The best part of this story is the 6 trainees. So many of these pro-revenge stories involve people trying to hurt entire companies without caring how their actions might affect lower-tier employees who have nothing to do with their dispute against the owners. But in this case, the original poster's friend not only hired the 6 trainees himself, he actually gave them better jobs than they had before. For anyone out there who ever buys a new business, let the morals of this one sink in. Cutting costs is important, but if the company is worth buying, then it's only because of the employees who help make it worth something. These owners clearly didn't know they were screwing over the patent holders, but they shouldn't need to. The fact that they thought they'd need 6 replacements for the original 3 engineers already tells you how much the OP's friend and his coworkers meant to that company. Pushing them out would have had consequences, even if this man hadn't taken the sweet, juicy revenge that he did. Entitled boss tries to shortchange my engineering work, and his equipment mysteriously stops working. I work for a company that provides specialized equipment used in manufacturing. During my time working in this field, I got to know many clients who would need these machines installed and serviced. One of these customers we'll call Jake. I later left the company for a different job, but Jake apparently kept my number. One afternoon, I got a call from Jake that they wanted a new unit installed. Another unit needed maintenance. He wanted to know if I was available. I let him know that I left the company, but that I could pass him on to someone who could help. He tells me he'll pay twice my current rate to install the unit over the weekend. He lets me know that the company has increased the rates for installation and the company just can't afford it. The instructions they sent over just aren't clear enough, and their engineers are scratching their heads trying to figure it out. He begs me to consider it, and I agree. For more context, installing this unit can take a good few hours, or up to a day on your own. The company gives you two options. You can either pay for an engineer to come and install it, or you can save the money and they'll send instructions so the customer's own engineers can install it. The instructions aren't easy to follow, and it's company policy that if someone has started to install the equipment, the supplier won't get involved, since they can't verify if any of the pieces were broken. This will be important later. I drive down on the weekend, and they show me the boxes of equipment. I set to work and make good progress installing the unit. Around 6 hours in, I'm stopped by Jake. I let him know I'm nearly finished, and he tells me, "Sorry, but they just don't have the budget to pay you." He says he understands my frustration, but his engineers can take it from here. To say I was frustrated was an understatement. I wanted revenge. There's a small button inside the unit that changes the unit to test mode. This is done to perform maintenance on the unit, but it's impossible to configure the unit with this button pressed. It's only possible to reach this button using a pin, so it's not easily pressed during installation. Because of this, the installation instructions don't mention it. There's no real way of telling the equipment is in test mode. It just won't work normally. I think you can guess where this is going. I click the button, collect my things, and leave. Monday morning, I get a call from Jake. I decline the call. I knew my old company wouldn't get involved since I already started installing the unit. I knew his engineers would never figure it out. I just had to let him stew. A few days later, after many missed calls, I finally pick up. Jake is furious. He asks me where the heck I've been and why I haven't been picking up the phone. He tells me they can't figure out how to configure the machine and they need my help. I say, "Why is this my problem? You won't pay me." He says he's sorry and they'll work something out if I can get there as soon as possible. I tell him, "Oh no, you're going to pay me £7,000 up front before I do anything." I'd never felt this powerful before. He screamed at me for a bit and hung up. He called back a day later after saying he's sorry for how he acted and said in a totally defeated tone that if I could come fix it, he would pay me. He tried to fight it, saying he'll pay when I'm done, but I was having none of it. After a bit of back and forth, he agrees to pay me. The money hit my account and I came in the next day. The look of confusion on his face when I took out a pin and changed the unit from test mode was priceless. It was even more priceless seeing his reaction as I packed up my tools to leave after only 20 minutes of configuring. Easiest £7,000 I ever made. Don't try to mess with a professional problem solver. The sad reality is that the original poster story probably rings true for anyone who's done any kind of contract work. Whether it's engineering, web design, it doesn't matter. If you've taken on freelance work for any amount of time, odds are that someone has tried to shortchange you and then demanded more service while you were still owed. This OP was put in a position where he was able to teach his employer a lesson, and he had every right to take advantage of it. But there's a bigger lesson than just not messing with people who can have one over on you. Clearly, Jake had no problem paying the money when he really wanted the service, which means he had no good reason to deny payment in the first place. And if there's any truth to the fact that the company couldn't afford to pay the OP, then the business clearly isn't doing a good job of managing its finances. If you can't figure out a way to keep your employees fed, then you shouldn't be in the position of overseeing employees at all, period. Random strangers keep using my parking lot, so I go Mr. Freeze on their sorry butts. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, 3 units each. We lived in 2 of them, rented out the other 4. There's nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all have parking. On the side streets are houses and very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units, since it was also our home, so we had parking for around 16 cars. Everything was fine for literally decades. Then, cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not our tenants. I blocked one of them in one day and went outside to see this jerk drive through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops. Nothing they could do. So I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We'd have to call them to have a car towed. The signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year, I arrive home and every space is filled. There are even cars on the street blocking in the other cars. I'm beyond frustrated. I call the tow company. They can't do anything for a few hours because they're so busy. We are in the Chicago suburbs. It's below 0 out. I have an idea. I dig out the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I run one hose inside to the laundry room faucet and turn on the hot water. This way, the hose and sprinklers won't ice up, but the cars and ground sure did. 3 sprinklers moved every half hour or so for almost 5 hours. Every car, every square inch of the parking lot, the street by the cars, encased in ice. I made it a point to spray ice in the locks, between the window seals and glass, and in the grills. I put away the sprinklers and hoses, then went to bed. At 4 a.m., I hear furious pounding on the doors and doorbells ringing nonstop. We just smiled and called the cops. Waited until they arrived, then went outside. The cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park here by their friend, who owned an apartment several buildings away. The same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told the people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission. violation, so all cars were ticketed. They were also towed since nobody could get in their vehicles. So many of Reddit's revenge stories revolve around some clever scheme or contract loophole, but I think this is the first time I've seen the original poster turn into a straight-up supervillain and just freeze ray over a dozen vehicles. It's worth pointing out that a lot of these people were just parking where they were told to park, so it's debatable whether they should have to pay a towing cost, especially when they would have moved their cars if they hadn't been frozen out. Hopefully they'll recognize that the person they should be angry at here is their friend. There's no telling what would have happened if he had just been a good neighbor and asked the OP's permission to use his parking lot, since, as the original poster said, there wasn't a lot of other parking on the street. Instead, he chose to be entitled and just offer something that wasn't his to a bunch of other people without so much as a conversation with the OP. I don't know. Do you think the OP's revenge went too far to hurt the wrong people? Leave us a comment telling us what you would do in this situation. My trashy neighbors used my yard as a landfill, so I threw them in the gutter where they belonged. My neighbor was pretty trashy. Cars sitting on blocks in the yard, cigarette hanging out of her mouth while she's 9 months pregnant, blasting Kid Rock levels of trashy. Well, this lady decided that paying $1 per trash bag was just too much. Our township will only pick up your trash if it is in one of the approved purple bags though, so normal trash bags will just be left behind. The trash truck drives right past them. Her solution? Buy normal trash bags at the dollar store and have her 8-year-old child tossed them over the fence into my yard. Now their trash is my problem. After confronting her, she just laughed. So I called the cops. They said that since the kid was so young and there was no proof his parents told him to do it, there was nothing they could do. So this went on for about 4 months. Me taking the bags of trash they tossed into my yard, wrapping them in purple bags that I paid out of pocket for, and putting them out to the curb. Pretty effing annoying. Not to mention the extra $3 or so a week I'm spending on trash bags. I'm slowly growing to hate this woman. It was annoying at first, but I was getting mad. Mind you, I own my home and she was renting hers. So I get a hold of their landlord and I offer to buy the house for a decent amount above market value, 17%. He jumps at the offer, and soon I am the proud owner of the house next door to me. Sure, it cost me $71,000, but what price do you put on peace of mind? The very first thing I did was serve them an eviction notice, in person, across that same fence they like to throw trash over. That was 31 days ago. As of today, the unit is empty. I don't know where they went, but there's someone else's problem now. All because she didn't want to pay for her own trash bags. I think I'm going to knock that house down and make my yard bigger. I've been wanting to put in a handball court. This is a funny story, but it's also a little strange. The OP was a doormat for 4 months and never even considered just throwing the trash back over the fence. They were upset about paying $3 a week, yet they were also both confident and wealthy enough to get revenge by simply buying a house above market value on a whim. Something seems fishy here. But the OP is a restaurant owner, so if this story about an off-the-cuff house purchase is true, then any viewers out there between jobs might want to consider making a down payment on an Applebee's. Click one of the videos on screen right now.